Picture this. An intensive care unit physician orders dialysis for a critically ill patient. The nurse she's speaking to sighs, slams the papers down on her table, and challenges the decision. This doesn't make any sense. We need a family meeting instead. The physician rolls her eyes and walks away. What's happening here? Both are dedicated, experienced clinicians, but beneath the actions lie some invisible assumptions. The physician might be thinking, I'm trained, I know what I'm doing, I shouldn't have to explain why I want to start dialysis. The nurse might be thinking, if I'm not asked, I'm not valued. She might be thinking, you're not the one in the room with the patient 12 hours a day watching him suffer. This is what happens when teams operate from unspoken, unexamined assumptions about their own work and about each other. And these good people can create a toxic culture through these actions.
What if building leadership and connection skills in real life was less about grand epiphanies and more about small, consistent reps? The way athletes train, the way musicians practice, the way simulation refines teaming and clinical performance. Push ups, sit ups, building up your cardio. We put challenges and weights in front of ourselves to get fit. We embrace no pain, no gain. Yet when we find something difficult in real life, especially an interpersonal something, we often skitter away. We put down the weight and walk away from the workout. Curious Now helps us lean into those everyday interactions, the awkward silences, simmering tensions, and high stakes conversations, and treat them like reps in a leadership gym. Curious Now, stronger later.
Welcome to Curious Now from the Center for Medical Simulation. I'm Jenny Rudolph, and today we're going to be talking about how to crack the code of culture within our teams. Often our teams seem to be stuck in certain patterns over and over, and then it seems miraculously we work great as a team. What is going on below the surface in those two situations? This week, we're going to help you get ready to map what is going on underneath the surface, and we're going to talk about it as ready to map the frames or assumptions that people are holding that lead to the actions they take, whether that's things they do or acts of omission or things that they say, and then how all that adds up to results for the team, whether it's results for the patient the team is caring for, whether it's results for a customer the team is caring for, whether it's results for the team itself, and whether it's results for the department or the organization around the team. The skill we'll be practicing this week is essentially a form of cognitive detective work, learning to map collective behavior by getting curious about what are the invisible assumptions driving those actions or inactions that lead to the results for our team. You can think of this as how do we develop collective competence as a team, or how do we get stuck in collective incompetence as a team? Thinking break here, James, for a second. Any comments there? Anything you want to see different?
I like how do we get stuck in collective incompetence?
Okay,
It's
yeah,
like a
that
group of
happens
competent people can somehow be collectively incompetent.
happens all the time. So let's talk about the framework or theory that underlies this sort of readiness goal for us as people trying to strengthen our personal leadership skills. We're building on the work we did in episode 10, where we introduced the idea that there are intendedly rational goals behind actions that we see. We often assume that a person has good assumptions, good beliefs, well thought out reasons when they do things that make sense. But what we've talked about before is even when people are doing something that looks like a mistake to us, like the wrong dose of a medication or treating a patient or a customer with impatience or anger, there's often something going on below the surface that actually makes perfect sense to the person doing it. And hence the word intendedly rational. They're trying to accomplish something good. We also talked about the chain of those assumptions driving the way we talk. So we may be extremely assertive, even aggressive. And our goal may be to dominate the conversation in such a way as to get something that's better, safer, stronger for our patient, our customer, or another colleague. The behavior itself doesn't look very helpful, but it's intended to be helpful. And then those assumptions and frames lead to some actions, and those actions in turn lead to some results. And the results could be the person who was dominated is not happy about it and pushes back, or the person who was dominated caves and withdraws and lets the other person walk over them, and a not necessarily very good thing happens with the customer or the patient, even though that was the intended outcome for all. So, what's really interesting about these frames, actions, results chains is not only that they sort of provide an invisible architecture for what's happening on our teams that can help us have some leverage and change it, but it's interesting for a second reason. And that is the unexpected and unintended reality that we often espouse certain kind of values and goals, but what we do in fact is not that. So an example of this is I espouse that I am an extremely participative manager, and I think that I really care about everybody's input. I want to take it on board when I'm making decision. And in a meeting, if someone asked me, what is my management style? I would say I'm an extremely participative manager. But if I put a microscope on that behavior, sorry, not a microscope, if I put a video camera on that behavior, what I might see is something like this. Hey, folks, we need to decide what are the criteria for the new administrative assistant that we're hiring. I really want to get all of your input. I think the correct criteria are this, 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 this. I've read this in the literature. I hope you all can agree with me. Is that good? So that might be my definition of being a participative manager, but other people might look at that and say, hey, you didn't really ask them for their input. You didn't really give them space. You never told them what was the decision-making process. And the implied decision-making process is you're deciding by yourself rather than having said, hey, we'll vote, or I'm going to listen to all of you and then we'll discuss until we arrive at consensus. That might be ways of walking my talk as a participative manager. So why did I mention all this? When we understand what are the underlying frames that drive the ways we talk, that drive the actions we get, we're able to better align our espoused values with our actual actions. This is particularly important for our teams. So, what we're talking about this week is the fact that when we get into repeated patterns as a team, there are certain frames that each member of the team holds, certain actions that each member of the team holds, and certain results that that leads to. So, going back to our story from the beginning of this episode and the recordings that you heard in the last episode, where we have a doctor and a nurse in the ICU, the doctor wants to start a hemodialysis line for the patient and get some fluid off this patient who's having some difficulty with their kidneys working properly. And the nurse is very concerned about further interventions because she thinks comfort care alone might be better for this patient. That micro team is stuck in a pattern of each of them advocating for what they want without really listening to what the other person wants. That's the example of a stuck pattern. But if you ask them, you probably would hear from each one of those members that they really care about what other team members need and want in order to take good care of their patients, but it's hard for them to enact it in the moment. So when we implant these two ideas, one is that I, as a person, or any of us, espouses certain values and often don't carry them out in fact, even though we want to, with the fact that we are intendedly rational people who have certain assumptions and then take actions that have results, even though those results may end up being the opposite of what we hoped. When we scale up to the team level, recognizing that each person has a task and a set of goals that they are trying to do, is a portal to collaboration. Jody Hoffer-Gattel, a organizational behavior theorist who thinks about this under the flag of relational coordination, has done tens of studies where she's found that when a dyad, triad, team, group has a shared goal, for example, in this case, I think both the doctor and the nurse want the best for this patient. They want him to suffer the least. They want him to feel as good as possible. But how they get there may not be agreed yet. So what Jody Hoffer-Gattel has found is that when a team has a shared goal and they have shared knowledge of each other's tasks. So in this case, the doctor's task may be to meet a promise that she made to the family about helping the patient get well enough to get home to his daughter's graduation, for example. And the nurse's task, she feels, is to reduce the patient's suffering on an hour by hour, day by day basis. If these two clinicians had a better understanding of each other's tasks, that, Jody Hoffer-Gattel argues, leads to more mutual respect. So why we want to scale this curiosity and empathy up to our team level as to what is going on with this other person, what are the goals that they have, is that that's the pathway from which we move from a toxic dynamic and culture to a collaborative, mutually respectful, and connected relationship and culture. So let's talk about what that would sound like in a dyad or duet or micro team. Think back to last week's episode where we were talking about transforming toxic culture one conversation at a time. What you heard in the second version of the conversation between the nurse and the doctor was the nurse said, "Oh, here we go again." And the doctor recognized that as a cue that something was off and asked, "Hey, could we get on the same page? I hear you're not very psyched about the HD line. What are your concerns?" And the nurse shared her concerns. And they were able to arrive at a collaborative solution within about 90 seconds of a short-term, essentially time trial of trying to help the patient have less fluid in their body using dialysis, but come back to it such that they could meet the nurse's goal of not having this suffering be prolonged. So you might be asking yourself, what's different this week from last week? Last week, we asked you to share what your point of view on something might be and ask the other person to share their point of view on the same situation. What we're doing this week is asking you to move that into the team context. So, the workout of the week this week is to map a microculture moment. That is, think of a time when your team recently felt a little off, wasn't going that well, or a time when your team really clicked. Everything was humming along. And ask yourself, what were the actions that different team members took? That could be things they said or didn't say. This could be things they did or didn't do. And what results did that lead to for your patient or your customer or team members or the department? And then ask yourself what might have been the invisible frames that led to that. You can invent those, you can infer those, and I recommend that you do. So, the first part of this exercise is for sure to infer or guess or invent what might have driven people's actions, multiple teammates. It's even better, though, if you can, and it feels reasonably safe to do so, to ask your teammate directly, hey, when you zigged and I zagged, I'm curious what was on your mind at that moment. Sometimes the ways that our teams get stuck can feel really confusing. Equally, when our team does really well, we sometimes have no clue why. This week's episode really tries to get at what is the underlying blueprint that's driving those moments when we get stuck, and what's the underlying blueprint that is happening when we're doing well. Exploring this may get you to a place where you can have a sense of the blueprint of stuckness and how to flip the blueprint of stuckness to a blueprint of better connection and performance. So I'm really curious to hear how this goes for you. If you have any comments, please find me on LinkedIn and let me know how it's going, or email us at curiousnow@harvardmedsim.org.